Okay, so I have a replay here. This one I'm actually in. I'm Cuesta here. We were playing 1809 Peninsular cores. Um, the rest of my clan is playing Beresford here, Del Parque here, and then a reserve army of Venegas with Cav and the Spanish Guard with their super drippy uniforms. If you see these guys, they're probably going to eat your French infantry for breakfast, so just always keep that in mind. The rest of the infantry for the Spanish armies is actually quite good. And then Beresford's first division is fairly meaty with like decently high accuracy and reload and okay melee. They just sometimes lack in morale and like shock resistance and things like that, but you have quite a few squares, decent speed, things along those lines. For my Cuesta army, I brought a L5 brigade that has almost like UK-ish shooting stats. Lots of skirmishers, a variety of different types of cav, and then grenadiers and militia and things along those lines, and then some small guns. So this game was actually recently cast by Kingston from the Imperial side, so I figured I would actually cast it from the Coalition side, just as a little bit of a difference. The map is Portugal 1A, if I remember correctly. I was in charge for this game. I typically don't like to be the overall commander. I'm generally better as like a core commander. I don't like to be the overall commander. You have to have a really good sense of how to get all of your cores in one spot that you want and then shape the enemy to it. Whereas if you're like just a really good reserve or core player, you can kind of read the battlefield in the moment and make that sort of happen, or make the play that your overall commander wants you to make. It's a different strength, and generally speaking, it's not one that I'm the best at. I just kind of expect people to know the timing for things, and that doesn't always work out. Or like people to be able to read the battlefield exactly the way that I'm reading it and come to the same conclusion. So yeah, it's like our clan always likes to try and put people in positions that they aren't necessarily the strongest at and let them work it out. So generally our plan was we were going to try and lightly push over here, knowing that the French could recombine a lot faster using these roads and probably push this side of the map, while we put up a light skirmish over here, defend this one, come across this way and maybe interrogate this crossroads here, while the rest of our Spanish reserve comes up this way and then across over the river. So in theory, our reserves are going to be a lot slower, if not only because of the terrain, but because we're L3, L4 for the reserve, whereas the French reserves, while they're back here, they can come straight forward to the road, beeline it over, and then beeline it again. And they're probably either the same or better speed. And then same with this army. If he decides to not contest this one point over here and just deploy on this road, they come straight down this way with all speed. The only army that can... You basically use this army to set the table for this attack here, and then the rest are able to filter in this way. So I had that in mind. I brought basically an army that would be self-sufficient by itself, and then hopefully be able to buy time for our reserves to come up, let them waste themselves away on the attack, and try to, you know, scout out and feel out where their main attack is. IZ, which is the clan that we faced as Rheinbund, Chain is really good at that type of like meta play, the strategic elements of it, and his teammates are generally really good about being able to execute the play that Chain wants. So there's obviously games where it doesn't work for them, but when all of them are in sync and, you know, hive-minding it basically, their attacks are quite ruthless. So I had that in mind. I've played with IZ and against IZ quite a bit when they were a bit more active. So I had an idea of what was going to happen in terms of attacking and defending and things like that. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and start fast forwarding it here a little bit to get us to the initial fight. I had put my L5s over here so that I could do like a quick screen on this side, and then my slower infantry on this side, because I knew that I wasn't going to be pushing too much further forward. The one thing that you'll notice that we don't have a lot of is light cav. The cores that we brought here actually don't get a lot of access to light cav. Venegas, I think, gets one. It's extremely expensive. Del Parque brought both the light cavs that he has access to. Beresford brought, I think it's just the one, and his other light cav is actually equally as expensive, and you don't get nearly as much of a trade-off for it. We're also a little bit light on guns compared to what you could maybe bring with the Spanish armies. We were also kind of experimenting with the idea of how a medium points game in 1809 would work without Welles's 13-point core, which is like the heavy pushing capable British UK army. We recently also played 1809 but with low points with Wellington, and I'll probably cast that game as well, just because it's an interesting comparison to this one. Whereas we basically took, I think it was like over a third of our points was Wellington, and then tried to fill out the rest with lower points Spanish. Generally, that's not how that type of matchup would work, so we were just testing the viability of it. And then on this one, we were testing the reverse, where a lot of people consider Wellington to be, or sorry, Wellesley in this case, to be 100% necessary for 1809. We just wanted to see how it would work with basically 3 Spanish Corps and Beresford. That did ultimately limit us in terms of stars. I think our highest overall gen is actually Del Parque, but I could be wrong. I think he's 3 stars and Beresford is 2. Cuesta, I think, is 1, if I remember correctly. Anyways, the other nice thing about this, in regards to artillery at least, is you'll notice that the ground is really broken. That's good for if you don't have a lot of guns and you just want to be able to move your troops with impunity. You'll notice like these ridges were ones that I was looking at for guns. If you put guns here, you do get a pretty good field of view without getting broken up and things along those lines. I wanted a really early scout because I wanted to know which way their armies were going to go. If this was only going to be a screen, I wanted to be able to figure out if they were going to shift all the way over here and actually attack Beresford, or if they were going to shift on an L and come at me this way. So I got really aggressive with my light cav here while my armies were moving up. A lot of people don't think that the Spanish have great stats, but honestly they don't play the Spanish if they say things like that. You have lots of excellent shooting and cheap melee units. Like my grenadiers are like, I think only 100 gold and still have like 17-18 melee attack. And they're still grenadier class and weight, so that makes a big difference. And then I have a full L5 brigade that's supported by skirmishers and things along those lines. The cav is truly lackluster. I don't necessarily find it to be great on the offensive, which, I mean, honestly, you shouldn't expect it to be great on the offensive. But you want it to be able to do at least something. A lot of times it can't do anything except exist, which, depending on who you ask, is enough. So Beresford is more or less committed here. His reserves are coming along this way. If I remember, this is his L5-ish brigade. Nope, just L4. Okay. We scouted a lot of this cav over here. That's a good cav screen, considering that we have very little cav over here. So when you have lancers, one trick is that you can just see if they're spotted or not. Here I was like nervous about light cav being in this forest, and when I'm not spotted anymore, or like when I'm hidden, or when I'm spotted next to a tree line, I am nervous that there's going to be cav in it. So I know now that there's probably not a cav there because I'm hidden right next to the tree line. That probably means the light cav's like right around here or something. You can kind of guess these things based on positioning awareness like that. And it also helps me mentally guess if their cav is going to be pushing me or something like that. Because if you remember from previous videos, Lancers have slightly shorter scout range than some of the other cav options. So the French cav actually have the ability to move over here more or less with impunity, because we just don't have the cav to counter them. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't help us because we don't have really good eyes on what's over here. And if you watch Kingston's stream, you'll understand why that's important. So he got 8-pounder set up here. And this is where the terrain advantage comes into play. In theory, right here behind this hill, I should be protected, and I might still be able to spot. It doesn't look like I have as good of a scouting range as I thought I did, but I made the effort. So at this point, we actually have no idea where their armies are concentrating. We can just guess. You can hear lots of troops at the crossroads, but they have two options at this point, and one is to push this way, and the other is to push this way. They had guns and a good cav screen here, so there's always a chance that they appeared with 3 corps over here, while they put a pitting force over here. And that's more or less what we're trying to figure out. This is notably more French dragoons and things along those lines. We were able to fully scout this corps. I made a mistake and didn't look at the map deployments and where their corps were, so I didn't actually know that this was just their 5-point here holding me back. Simultaneously, I didn't really want to push too heavily early on because I had a sneaking suspicion that there would be reinforcements. So if I pushed this too hard, I would be pushing away from my friendly reinforcements that are still this far away and into what could be allied reinforcements here that, if they had started shifting this way, would be close enough to come back and then back down to like stomp me. And then I'd be out of position and we'd lose the 10-pointer right off the bat. Here I also was abusing the terrain advantage. I knew that this was a slight crest of a hill, and I was trying to get my artillery into a position where they could do something. My cav got caught over here. I got a little bit greedy with my scouting. I moved them up to the top of the ridge line. They got hit by 8-pounders, and then there was actually a cav in the trees. So felt a little silly losing my cav there. I was also microing over here whenever that happened. This is not a great shooting position for me. I don't know what I was doing there. The unit needs to be probably up and over this way. So Beresford has like a nice little screen here. All of these units are hidden compared to like we can see what's over here. And then his main infantry has already arrived here. So in theory, Beresford could cross over. We could replace him with Del Parque over here as a screen, and then you know, keep filtering in more and more units. My cav actually does survive. The tricky part is that if you decide to commit to one side or the other, you'll have to cross between this mud pit, which slows you down. The French have a road behind them that crosses over, so in theory, if they need to make a move from one side to the other to recombine after they've scouted, it's a little bit faster for them. Our road actually comes backwards, whereas theirs is like perpendicular with their lines, or parallel rather. Again, I didn't want to commit too much too early without knowing exactly what was going on here. Saw a chance to get these scrims. This is only like 100 gold light cav or something like that. And I figured if it did route,
our men are running for,
which it does, it should come back because it'll be above half strength. It's a little bit of a risk, but I also kind of just wanted to put a little bit of pressure and see what was behind. As you saw, there is more French infantry back here. So this is where also a lack of scout cav was getting a little worrying. I knew that there could be something here, but their guns were seeing off my really crappy light cav, and I just got pushed away there. So we have no eyes over here. We only have a light idea of what's going on over here. Pretty good early scouting here from the skirmishers here, getting a lot of kills. Beresford is pushing up on this flank here, but again, it's not scouted, so we don't actually know if he's pushing into anything at all. I got these 4-pounders put basically point blank. They help really to break up the French here. Like I said, this unit is maybe not ideally placed for shooting, and they made the mistake of advancing at me here. These 8-pounders do have pretty good line of sight. They can skip maybe 1 or 2 rounds into them there. I'm scouting more French infantry back here. I did like a little bit of a push on this flank here just to scout it, basically. Recon in force, or whatever you want to call it. As you can see, the rest of our reserves are finally made it to the road, and they're able to shift across to here. At this point, we still don't know exactly where they're concentrating, which is a problem, but I mean, our reserves are also hidden, and they don't exactly know where we are. For all they know, based on our general deployment, we could be trying to push this side of the flank. We have 3 gens on this side, they have 1, they have 3 gens on this side, and we have 1. So there's always a chance that we're pushing here while they might be pushing us here. We get a much better picture now based on this here. You can basically see there's a lot of infantry in reserve. I bring up my L5s to try and get some quick abusive fire on the French. These guys generally have decent shooting stats. I wanted to get some easy kills, and they're fast enough if I overcommitted that I can pull away using the road. This is a complete misplay, and it loses this cav again for me because they got shot by skirmishers, which, big mistake. So I lost one of my 2 scout cav, and we had 4 scout cav, I think, total. So that's a quarter of our eyes. So I saw this, and this makes me a little nervous. Big batteries coming to get set up in the center tells me that they're gonna try and rip, you know, the big line hole through this way and then just push straight down the road. So Beresford at least knows that there is something in front of him, and he's still unscouted moving through these woods, so the French might get caught off balance by a whole Portuguese army appearing out of the tree line, basically on their left. At least that was the hope. So, as you can see, it's more or less a fairly slow start of a game. That's mostly because we're both trying to figure out dispositions, make the strategic analysis of where cores need to go, who needs to go where, and how to, like, read the enemy. As the coalition, in this case, we're not moving to attack or concentrate to attack, but prepare ourselves for the eventual French attack and make our reserves in a way that that can receive it, counter it, and then we can maybe like flip and make the attack. You basically want to be able to guess in like a 4D chess move, like where the French might attack, draw them into attacking that position, but have your reserves and everything ready, and guns and other stuff to really punish any attack that they try to make. And then when they pull back, you can pursue a little bit, and then just keep grinding them down and keep doing that over and over and over again until you can actually start breaking units apart. That's honestly easier said than done. Making it so that you can stop their initial attack is like quite difficult. Again, there's French infantry somewhere over here, and I don't scout it. You can even hear them, but I'm too busy microing over here to scout this, even with my ears. This was a bit of a mistake. I actually almost lose these guns because moving them to the side. I thought I would be able to, like, I could see the French stacking behind here, and I wanted guns for this road. So if the French start pushing down, my 4-pounders, being quick fire, would be able to sort of break up the attack. But as you can see, they almost get sniped immediately by 8-pounders. And the French are actually shooting pretty well, but it is 3 units versus 1, even if it is an L5. And now they're supported by artillery. It actually shocks this unit completely. It's low enough kills that it'll come back, but Beresford is still more or less holding here. He's our biggest army, I think. Maybe Del Parque is a little bit bigger, but he's now here behind me. And Venegas' guard support is here behind Beresford. Again, we still don't have a clear picture of what the French army looks like. And the French don't have a clear picture of ours. But they have the ability to not care due to their morale and speed advantages. They can just basically pick a point and try to overwhelm it, combine really quickly, and then push through it. Whereas we have to more or less guess the positioning and then make our counterplay for it. I start scouting over here, moved some guns up because I knew there was French infantry somewhere over here, so I wanted to get my guns into a position where they could hold back anything that's coming this direction. And I brought my light cav from this side over here. And with this amount of infantry starting to show up, I decided to pull back from the center because I wasn't quite sure what their disposition was, and I felt it was better safe than sorry. I actually somehow get these 4-pounders out, even though they're under direct fire from the 8-pounders. It was super lucky. And this is... I'm still microing over here, pulling back away, and I totally missed this. Which was a big scary moment. This was like literal panic of there's an entire French corps over here on our flank, and we have nothing over here yet. We do have our reserves showing up, and I have a flexible enough army to come over here. This is heavy cav though, and one of the better decent ones against an okay light. light cav. But just the massive heavy cav will win. Now my guns are basically exposed here, the only 8-pounders we have on this side of the field. With the realization that we have a core over here on our flank, we decided to shift our reserves this direction. Kingston thought that we were actually withdrawing in panic, but this was actually semi-panic, semi-calm. I had already started pulling back because I could just sort of feel like there was more here than the French were letting on, and I didn't want to get caught out. That's my guns. I thought I could have saved them, but wasn't quite close enough. And our full reserves were here, ready to like shift over where we needed them to. Plus I have my L5s and my quick guns here, so we started to think that maybe this is actually an isolated core. We knew that there was an army here. We knew that there was at least part of an army or a full army here, and then maybe something around this way. But there was all of this space in this direction, along this axis, that was open. So theoretically, this army was by itself. And we had half of my army plus the full Del Parque's army, which is, I think, like 3,000 men or something along those lines, of actually quite decent Spanish lines. He tries to get my guns here. It's a bit ambitious, and loses his cav because of it. So we're actually now at a cav advantage against what is probably an isolated core. Beresford at the same time is making attack on this flank, but there are a lot of French guns over here. These are 8-pounders, I think. I think there's another set of 8-pounders, like here. There's some more back there. So that's... If you want to counter, like, Brits and Spanish and things along those lines, lots of guns is the way to do it. My L5s are really instrumental here because, generally speaking, the French can pull away from making a mistake like this. When you have an L5 army, you can punish the fact that you're just as fast, and you have more or less instant firing with having been a coalition, so Team 1. Now, there is the main French attack beginning on this axis again. Knowing that this army is isolated, they decide to push the center, which is the right move. I go in with cav. My cav red lines before it even makes contact, which is always nice. If this was any other dragoon, you know, like a decent dragoon, I probably could have actually done some work on this infantry here. I actually didn't know this was a square when I was trying to make my attacks. This is a trash light cav, so it obviously isn't going to make an actual move here. These 8-pounders are quite painful on this side. We do have some guard in reserve here, and I'm mostly on this side. Again, I caught more infantry trying to retreat, but
our men are running, sir.
Spanish cav just doesn't have the shock res or the initial damage ability to punish this French army that's, in my opinion, out of position. If the sides were reversed, and this was a Spanish army that's out of position, and this is 2 French corps pursuing it, this guy's dead. So the other issue right now is that this is actually pretty good infantry here. We're entangled between me and Del Parque. And by entangled, I mean we have his units behind mine, my units behind his. Some of my units were overlapping with his. That type of situation isn't really good when all of your units have the same flags and you're trying to micro them. and you don't know where certain things are going to be. So the guard is making an attack this direction. This is probably where we should have pushed. Have all of Beresford come this way.
Sir! Sir! Our
Support the
general is
guard
under
and attack directly into the center on this flank. You'll see how quickly the guard infantry melts these lines. And if we puncture this spot here, then we can start rolling up the flank, and then this flank is not going to matter anymore. And same with the center. We still know that the center is the 5-pointer, and then this has to be probably, I don't know, maybe the 11-pointer. But you can see they've already started to go to red morale, just from a very small limited engagement. So if we brought all of Beresford right here along this line, and then guard just pushes through, we grind through this corner really quick. At this point, also on this flank, we probably should have been satisfied and not pursued at this. He got away. Our cav wasn't able to destroy him. There's no way that we're going to finish this army off, and now we're in a kind of a tenuous position, so we should have pulled back, both Del Parque and myself here in the center, and just relied on the fact that we have a lock. Don't sit in the forest, because the French are going to have the advantage in the forest versus us, because they'll be able to melee. And then maybe pull back on this side while we initiate an attack on this position here. And then I can maybe pin while we just throw all of the Portuguese through the corner. But we didn't do that. So now that the moment has kind of slipped away to destroy the isolated core, we've stabilized the line in a way that more or less now we have a full picture. We know that there's enough infantry here to attack with. We know that this is a little bit thinner and that there's a full core over here, which means that this side over here is quite thin and it's being held mostly by guns. When you see this much infantry stacked up in one spot, you can pretty much guarantee that they're capable of making a pretty hefty attack. And if you notice, our reserves are looking a little bit thin. Just the pure concentration, if you're looking at numbers games, there's what, like 15 battalions right here, and I'm holding it with 3 scrims, a couple guns, and like, that's it. That's a scary prospect. So I put all my focus now over here, and I realized that we're in a bad spot, so I started pulling back. I don't know if the guard needed to pull back here or not. I didn't realize he was winning so handily. I think I called for the guard to reposition to our center because I could see this attack coming. There is a big flank coming through the woods here. It was scouted. But I think this unit doesn't square in time. And again, this is where speed does come into a factor. Having like a little bit of a fast infantry corps here helps me hold or pull away from this attack. This is French dragoons coming in against my skirmishers here. They probably could have just finished this off. It's only going to be, you know, Spanish heavy cav holding this back. I didn't realize how deadly those guns were. That was like 10 models off that. So this is actually really concerning, also because we're trying to pull back in the center while microing this. That's like a very scary flank to have while you're also trying to reposition your reserves. And while this attack is going on. So you can see that Del Parque has infantry here and infantry here. And he's got a major attack brewing on his flank here. Beresford probably needed to push this way. He does make a pretty nice attack here. Venegas Cav got absolutely obliterated over here. I think that was 10 models off of that. They think better of attacking here. I think they saw our deep reserves and more reserves coming up and said, you know what, never mind, we will pull back. And that's kind of what you want to force the Imperials to do. They took quite a good amount of losses walking up to make this attack, and we didn't lose overall too much, even in total models, you know what I'm saying? We got to shoot them as they were coming up with artillery, and my infantry was fast enough to put some damage on them. Skirmishers were sniping them the whole time, but this is where the main concern is now. They might have actually pulled back from this because they knew that this flank attack was being made. And I guess losing heavy cav here. Does cross the corner of the square a little bit, but there you could see the move orders where it tried to move over. Just heavy cav is kind of finicky like that. Not sure if that was worth it, but you know, Beresford is able to move up now because the guns have been disabled. The problem is that's like a skeleton force, and we have a huge French attack here on this flank. If you can keep the French at bay, then you can have a good time.
We have killed their general, sir. Now they must break.
And that was a good snipe by some 8-pounders, I think. I don't know where the shot came from. Oh, it was over here. So it came like this and killed their gen. It's a good shot. And infantry like this are actually quite okay in melee, and I have a decent-ish grenadier in the house, so that can hold and provide support. But you saw how quickly the Spanish lines here just melted to point-blank volleys. Like, yeah, they got a couple hits off on them here, but that was actually like not a great trade. Plus now you have friendly routing units. And melee and forest is always difficult, mostly because, as you can see, it's really hard to see what is actually in the trees. So Beresford actually won on this flank here. Maybe could use the cav to vigorously pursue them, might be able to snipe the guns, but it's still like really hard to destroy this element by itself. At this point we're in a bit of a panic, because we still have all of this French infantry here now shifting. Their main attack was coming this way, now they've shifted and they're gonna L-shape in like that. We have a full French corps that's more or less routing Del Parque's flank here. And we have to try and figure out how to stabilize this front line with 2 corps against what I think is like 3.5. Maybe 2.5. And one way to do that is to counterattack swiftly when the units are already tired coming out of melee and out of damage. But we really don't have the reserves to do such a thing. I'm trying to get flank fire in to route these units before they can route our friendlies in combat. And now we have the big French battalions coming in. This is enough infantry that you can just like literally walk forward with it. And that's how concentration of force works. So they managed to get the guns. The guard is here in the center now. It's a bit of a friendly rear charge, but understandable. Like the micro involved in trying to retreat while you're trying to save part of your army is quite difficult. Cav coming down now with another attack. I think I killed my own guys there, yeah. And this also poses a problem. When you're a shooting-based army and your friendlies are routing in front of you, it actually gives a screen for the French to close in. That was probably a misclick. So technically that unit's trying to cross now to melee that one. But we might not be putting enough hurt on whatever's here. So Beresford has given up this attack up here and is coming in along this direction. They do have a lot of guns still here to counter a Beresford push into their side. It's a lot of routing Spanish, a lot of French that could route.
Our men are running, sir.
We do have the guard here to kind of back us up. So a lot of these units are actually at fairly small sizes now, and we've beaten them up quite a bit and still have a decent reserve, even though there's a lot of routing units.
Our men are running, sir.
Again, units overlapping. I tried shoring up this flank. We have a difficulty when it's multiple different armies together in one spot. And then you have the double issue of friendlies routing all through your lines. Venegas maybe getting this cav.
We've taken a building, sir.
So, we did hold for a little bit, and it did look like we might be able to flip it if we just had either a little bit more reserves or something along those lines, but now this is completely broken. You can see units are even getting ready to route just from being over here next to all these routing Spanish. This is a lot of units that potentially could have come back. And then there's still a chance that with this amount of Beresford infantry, that these sort of like half-strength battalions, I mean, look how few men are in some of these units still, and with the amount of resources that they sort of expended to get there, I think there's still a chance that Beresford comes in, we deploy along here using the house as our main anchor, and then he just machine guns down some of these French units with like a deep reserve and things along those lines.
Fatigued, sir. Must rest a while.
That, however, is easier said than done, especially when we have such a wide frontage. But Beresford still is basically a fresh army, and these two corps here are, you know, fairly beat up overall. I don't think units like this can make another attack in general. There's a chance that they can, no doubt, but it's not as likely that it will succeed. And if they do, then that's the game for us, you know? Sorry, if they don't succeed and they throw away whatever it is that they have here, then we have the manpower reserve still to kind of make something happen. But now it's basically all in the hands of Beresford to do a very, like, strong counterattack, but it has to be at a speed that works. Like, I mean, this unit just gave one volley and that unit went to red. So once you get a chain route going of the weakened French lines, you could actually do a lot of damage. And then we could maybe hope that some of these units over here that are at, like, well above half strength will come back. One of our main priorities was making sure that they couldn't farm us so that our units might actually be able to come back. Like, literally, Del Parque's army is all above half strength. Beresford's infantry immediately redlining those guys. Like I said, this is a bit too far of a forward deploy when there's this much cavalry here. We really needed to just basically hold this corner, and then he comes up maybe over here with the remainder of his infantry.
The men are fatigued, sir, and must rest a while.
You can see that some units start coming back. I think this one will probably double route because it's so close to everything else over there. Having your line like this, probably a little sketchy since the corner of your line is a house. It's really easy for the French to run in along this line. More reserves are still filtering in. This poor cav just got blasted. And same with this one. The French had a significant gun advantage, and that bought them space, basically like here and over here, where we couldn't really push into them because we didn't have guns or enough guns to support. And if you try to walk into this many 6 and 8 pounders, your army is gonna just get obliterated. So the important thing here is that we shoot. Don't get too fancy with your formations, just run into combat and get to shooting. I wouldn't even give, like, shoot orders for this reason, because with these weird terrains, you know, like, your units will sometimes not, quote-unquote, be able to see the unit, even though it's visible. The actual unit itself can't spot it, so it'll do, like, weird things and shuffle along. It's probably better to just let it shoot. Again, here, probably better to let at least one of these shoot. Because one volley from the Walloon guards will probably rout some of these units. But you have to let them shoot in order for that to happen. Yeah, here's that attack coming near a house, like I said. It is really hard to defend like this. And Portugal, even though some of their units have like 17 melee attack, the morale and defense is not high enough to be able to, like, save you in every situation. If the units are weakened and you have to, like, 1v1 it, then yeah, sometimes it'll work. provincial grenadiers doing the Lord's work.
Our men are running, sir.
When your micro gets stretched like that, stuff like this happens where you don't get to move the rest of your army because you're so focused on what's happening over here. This is a bit of an unfortunate cross here. We spoke to IZ about it, and they looked at their orders and it was more or less accidental. Like, this unit followed this other unit, and that ended up getting caught because this unit walked in front of it, but in general, IZ played pretty clean. Yeah, at this point, you know, the counterattack has failed. Portugal's corner got attacked here, and we didn't have enough really here to counterattack with. Some of our units did start coming back. We had at least 2 of the guard infantry come back. This attack over here did not work. Oof. Absolutely executed those guys. Anyways, it was still a fun battle for us. Our shortcomings were really in the scouting department and then not acting on what scouting we did have. Because we couldn't fully scout, we didn't have a clear picture of their disposition, and the French were able to stretch out with very minimal forces, but used a lot of their guns to keep their minimal forces intact, if that makes sense. So they were able to use force multipliers like big artillery and just enough cav to support small infantry that, you know, big sections of the map that we were trying to advance on were basically cut off while they were able to concentrate lots and lots more infantry on this side. Initially, while it looked like panic, and there was a panic moment when my cav walked over here and I was trying to pull back from the center because we thought the attack was coming there. When I was pulling back and I saw that there's a whole nother corps on our flank,
The men are fatigued, sir.
it was,
Must rest a while.
holy shit, we need to reposition completely and figure out how to beat this issue here. Luckily we had a full reserve that was already in position to move over that way, and then the panic went away and we actually got to the point where we were feeling a little bit confident that we had actually isolated or found an isolated French corps here, and that if we moved quick enough and decisively enough with what we had available, we could crush him before the main attack got underway. Unfortunately, as you saw, our pursuit cav basically evaporated on contact. We weren't able to put enough damage, and then they were able to restabilize. At that point, we probably should have pulled back and just given up the house so that we could protect the army over here, because then we knew that there was another attack coming this way, and then should have countered with a wait over here. It's really easy to see all that in hindsight, but really hard to see it in the moment of the game. Especially when you're the center of the army and not the reserve. If you're commanding, it's a lot easier to be the reserve player because you're not microing infantry on the front lines, and you can get a better read of the full map. So like if I was, say, Venegas sitting in the rear, it'd be a lot easier for me to say, okay, look, there's a lot of units on your left. We don't know what's on the right, but maybe we pull back the Portuguese over here and reconcentrate here in the center where they looked a little weak before their guns got set up.
Our men are running, sir.
Things like that. And then you have the ability to maneuver your reserves where you think they're needed. And then the other players set up the battlefield to the way that your reserves can be instrumental. When you are the front player, you're trying to set up for your reserves, and then when you're a reinforcing army, you're trying to figure out where do you deploy to kind of work off of what the first person has set up. And we did that okay, I think, in this game. It's just overwhelming concentration on this side that we initially held once, turned it around, pulled back again, stabilized, and then they made another big push. We stabilized that briefly, and then that was basically it. Once the Spanish start routing, it's really hard to stop them from full-on routing everywhere. But yeah, it was well played by the IZ. Nicely done coordinated mass attack. I will go ahead and fast forward because there's not much left to see here. It's just mopping up a handful of units. Yeah, it was a fun game. Wellesey definitely probably would have helped. We'd had a little bit more light cav, more stars, better, I guess, like shock damage value with his infantry over what some of the units that we had. But again, like I said at the beginning, we were trying to test how the 1809 cores felt without Wellesey, and honestly they did pretty well, I think. We could have just concentrated a little bit better, and that wouldn't have let us be punished quite so hard for spreading more or less across the map in this big outer horseshoe, while the French had an inner horseshoe with a road behind them. So we saw that how long it took for Beresford to come back over and then this way. Like, this core had already gotten eaten, whereas they were able to pull away from this side with Beresford, get on this road, and then go this way. But you can see how much damage we did. That's a lot of French routing units. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I do recommend checking out Kingston's cast of it, because it is on the opposite perspective, so you can see all of the French movements instead of the coalition ones. Just gives you a little bit like more perspective on the match. But again, thanks for watching.